It was the crime that rocked an affluent Atlanta suburb for years. Now, a local crime writer takes us inside this baffling murder in her new book, A Devil Went Down to Georgia. We welcome author Deb Miller Landau. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us about the beginnings of your journey with this story. You were assigned to write about this case about 20 years ago.
Yeah, so in 2004, I was a writer for Atlanta Magazine in Atlanta, Georgia. And I was asked to cover this, at the time of a cold case. It was 17 years since the day of Lita McClinton Sullivan's murder. So I took it on. They wanted fresh eyes, and I got really into the story. And it was an impactful time for the city and a huge story at the time, and a big deal for me as a writer. And that's how I kind of got into it.
So you wrote this initial article, kind of diving into the previous 17 years of the case, and then ever since then it just stuck with you.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things. I left Atlanta, moved across the country, came to live in Portland, and kept hold of this banker's box full of files and just couldn't really ever let it go. And then fast forward to, as we all know, the summer of George Floyd and the pandemic, and things were pretty spicy here in Portland. And it got me thinking about the story in a whole new way, because it's about an interracial couple and sort of their long road to justice. And so it kind of opened up the box.
For sure. Well, and tell us a little bit about Lita's backstory. She's a fascinating character.
Yeah, so Lita was a black socialite from Atlanta, very powerful, politically powerful black parents. She went to Spelman College, and just grew up at a time where the civil rights in the South were really changing. So she grew up through the Voter Rights Act, the desegregation of schools, and of course the laws that discriminated against anti-racial marriage. And then she met a Boston millionaire named James Sullivan, and everything changed.
So tell me about some of the most surprising things that you learned or uncovered in your research initially, and then over the past couple of decades, this case has been with you for a lot of your life now.
Yeah, so back when we were talking about it originally in 2004, we weren't really talking about race. And one of the things that I talked to everyone that I spoke to then and now, I said, what did race have to do with it? And most white folks said, well, it didn't really have that much to do with it, because they were an interracial couple, but it wasn't really a big thing. And every single black person I talked to said, well, of course race had something to do with it.
Of course.
It always does.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to dig into that and figure out what that meant a little bit more, especially, as we start to have language around talking about race.
Yeah. Well, and it's, tough that it took so long to kind of get to a place where these stories have a bigger voice. But tell me more about, if folks haven't heard the specifics of Lita's story. It's just a really tragic circumstance.
Yeah, so she was married for 10 years to James Sullivan, who was originally from Boston but came down and inherited his uncle's business in Georgia. And they were married for 8 years before she left him, and he'd done some pretty bad behavior, let's say. And so she finally left him, moved back to Atlanta, and filed for divorce. And they went through a very contentious divorce for a couple of years. And on the day that a judge was to decide about the validity of a sort of dubious postnuptial agreement, she was puttering around in her house, and she got the doorbell rang. She looked outside, and there was a man standing there with a long white box with a pink bow around it. And so she thought ordinary flower delivery. Eyewitnesses heard her say, "Good morning," and then the man pulled out a gun and shot her twice, and she died 20 minutes later.
God, it's hard to even imagine that happening. And I know that you kept an album of photos of Lita on your phone throughout this process. Did that keep you going through the hard times of running into dead ends covering this case?
Yeah, and then I just also, her family and some of the family support, lawyers and private investigator, really everyone who I ever spoke with about this story, it meant something to them. So it wasn't just me who felt that. So it was kind of like a team effort. A lot of people really contributed their thoughts and ideas, and it's really cool to see it now, a book and a live thing.
Yeah. Full circle in so many ways. And tell us more about the aftermath of that story, James Sullivan and then the alleged hitman, and how you kind of found all these characters as well.
Yeah, so after the shooting, the hitman vanished into thin air, and everyone thought, well, the husband must have something to do with it. But he had an alibi. He was down in Florida at the time, and they couldn't find the hitman. They didn't have a murder weapon, and so the case went cold, like for a long, long time, until somebody saw a television show in Texas and said, "I know that guy," and identified James Sullivan as somebody who gave her then trucker boyfriend an envelope full of money back in like right around the time of the murder. And so the authorities started to put the pieces back together and eventually apprehended the hitman. And then as soon as they did that, James Sullivan vanished. And that put him on the FBI's most wanted list. He had everybody looking for him, Interpol and all of the authorities, and he vanished again.
So how did they eventually track him down? Because there was justice served eventually.
Yep. So in 2002, which was 17 years after 15 years after the murder, somebody saw an episode of America's Most Wanted, and in it there was all this information about James Sullivan, and the man lived in Chiam, Thailand, which is 80 miles south of Bangkok.
Wow.
And he said, "That guy lives in my building." And sure enough, the Thai authorities followed the man they thought was James Sullivan, made sure that they had a Loctite case, and then finally arrested him. And he fought extradition back to the U.S. And lived in a Thai prison cell while he did that, but eventually lost and came back to face the music here in the States.
You just never know what source of media or article, like what you wrote initially, will kind of connect with somebody who does have a missing piece of the case and be able to raise their hand and say, hey, I might be able to help here. And it unfortunately just took so long in this case.
Absolutely. I mean, if not for the media, this case might not be solved. And if not for Lita's family, who just kept their...
Never gave up.
Never gave up. Yeah.
Tell us, most recently, since the book just came out earlier this month, and you just finished some coverage for 2020 that hopefully we'll see soon as well.
Yep, we're 2020 is doing a 2-hour episode on the case, coming hopefully in October, November. And yeah, it's exciting to see that people sort of caring about it, and especially in light of sort of our political climate and what we're dealing with today. It's really relevant, these things.
It's an important story for sure. Hey, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Thanks for having me.
We want to let everybody know Deb's book is A Devil Went Down to Georgia. She will be speaking at Powell's Books this Thursday, August 22nd at 7 p.m. We'll have all that information on our website at katu.com. We'll be right back with more Afternoon Live right after this.